if you know me, you know I love sports. And so it's always fun to sit down with my friend Dave Shore and talk about just the Mavs and the Cowboys and everything in between. He's a former ESPN reporter and had his own talk show on ESPN as well. So we're going to talk sports, faith, and all the things in between. So thanks for joining me today for this very special episode of 1 Degree of Andy. Before we get started, make sure to subscribe so that you never miss an episode. Leave us a nice review. Tell your friends about our little podcast. Get ready for my conversation with Dave Shore. My friend, it is good to see your face, dude.
It's so great to see yours as well. Isn't that funny how we do it?
I know. Well,
via
we
video?
text all the time. Yeah, we text all the time or, connect that way. And just, it's kind of like, well, hopefully one day we'll be in the same city and hang out. And, and this is, I guess we have to resort to being on each other's podcasts.
Well, who would have known? I mean, growing up in the media and being in the media, I never would have thought that any of us would have communicated this way. But, I go way back. We'd have to pull over the side of the road when I was a TV news reporter, and I had to have some quarters to make some phone calls at the payphone.
Yeah, I remember those days. Yeah, I remember having to call my wife. We would, there were back in our truth days. There were 24 of us on the bus, and or whatever. We were, if there was a payphone there was a mad rush off the bus to try and get there to call home. But yeah, no, the kids don't remember. The kids will never know.
No, we just dated ourselves completely, and any Google search will be brought up easily by old man stories right there.
That's right. Well, I'm glad we've made it to old man status because we have a lot of life to talk about. And so just for my audience, I want to introduce you, Dave Shore, my friend for, 30 years plus, I think. I feel like we met, in the Carolinas somewhere.
Yeah.
Way back in the day after a For Him concert. You've worked at ESPN. You've been in sports media your entire career, and I love talking sports with you. But I also love just kind of catching up with you and your family and how you're doing. So, welcome to the 1 Degree of Andy podcast.
Yeah, this is great. You've been doing a good job. I mean, I still, I'm a connoisseur, but then I'm also, I had to manage talent in all my years at ESPN and stuff. So you're doing a very good job. You're a very good interviewer.
Oh, thank you. Well, we call that in this business herding cats. That if you got one more than one artist or celebrity that you're trying to get to sit down and have a conversation with, it can be all over the place. But that's part of that I love. There's that unknown quality that we're running into every one of these conversations that I don't know, I look forward to.
Well, the other funny thing is the intersection that we have of the interests of sports and music, right? I mean, I can't tell you how many times doing sports games, I ended up with friends that I still remain in contact with, wonderful in the music industry, but wanted to be in sports, and vice versa for many of the people in the sports industry. They all wanted to be musicians or do that. Yeah. So it's always been a great intersection between those two industries.
Well, you can't be shy. That's the thing. If you want to be a full-time artist, you can't be shy. You have to be outgoing and willing to do whatever on stage. And I always think that's the same thing with guys who make it to the college and professional level. Is you got to be willing to make a fool of yourself and lose big as much as you win big. It's part of just that. I'm just going to throw myself out there and see what happens. You have to have that quality for sure.
Yeah.
Well, we met. So let's talk about when we met. So that would have been, I'm going to guess, mid '90s or early '90s, something like that. You may remember that date or that time more specifically than me, but I feel like it was maybe in the Carolinas somewhere. Am I right in remembering that?
First time in the Carolinas was late 2000s. So we must have met. If it was in the late '90s, it may have been Lexington, Kentucky, or Portland, Oregon, where I was.
West Coast. It was Portland. Yeah. That's where it was.
It had to be Portland then. To 97 to 2000. So that range because. Then we talked a lot of Mavs basketball when I was in Dallas during the 2000s. So
yeah, that's right. Well, tell me your story. I want to know how you got into this business.
Well, it's funny because I always wanted to be on the air. I always wanted to be interviewing people or doing the sports call. A famous call of a game. So I thought the only way I'll get any experience is to go to a smaller university where I could actually get on the air. So I went to Anderson University in Indiana,
Oh yeah,
where, as you well know,
man,
so many talented singers and musicians came
that's right.
out of that
Yeah,
school. There wasn't that many of us broadcasters, so I got to do everything. Not too many people listen to our radio station, but at least I got a lot of experience there in the Indianapolis area, and so that propelled me to the years of TV news, TV sports anchoring, and then eventually with ESPN and sports talk management.
where was your first
and on
anchoring
air.
job?
Evansville, Indiana. So you probably performed at Roberts Stadium, possibly there
Oh yeah,
at some point. But just one of those really classic. I always call those classic news markets because a lot of the anchors and reporters stayed there almost their entire broadcast life. Same with Lexington, Kentucky when I was there next. Just great sports, great area to live in, and so that's the hardest part about moving around is that you don't get a chance to stay at some of the areas that you really loved.
yeah. Did you play sports growing up? I mean, was this part of your like?
I
I know for me it was. I love sports, and that my greatest memories I have of my dad and my brothers growing up is watching Cowboys games, and I grew up in Central Texas, so Cowboys
yeah
Rangers games, Mavericks games when they when they first came to Dallas in 1980. Those are the excuse me, and my brothers played baseball all through high school,
yep.
and my dad was a coach, and so we would have really spirited conversations just about our teams and certain individuals who we liked and didn't like. So was sports a big part of your life growing up?
Yeah, it was always a big part because I grew up in a small area in Illinois, and so you almost played everything. You didn't play it well, but
Yeah.
I did think that I would go and maybe kind of walk on in college at a smaller school in baseball, and then I realized those guys were really good, and if I'm ever going to be on the air, I might as well just forget about the playing days and start being the voice of something. So I guess I learned really, really early on, as we all need to do, where your skill level is, and you kind of run with it.
Now, who were your teams growing up? Like, if you're
Well,
in Illinois, were you a Bears fan? Were you a Bulls fan?
well, no, it's funny because all my friends growing up in Central Illinois, first of all, baseball, you pick either the Cubs or Cardinals, and you don't go either way. So I picked
Yeah.
Cardinals early on, and then
Oh wow.
all my friends were Bears fans, and I thought I don't want to be just like them. So I picked the Cowboys in the '70s, and just grew up never knowing that I'd be traveling with the team in the 2000s or whatever. So I was there a big Tom Landry and Roger Staubach fan growing up in Illinois. So
Wow.
because they got to be known as America's team for a reason.
That's right. Oh man, I remember those days. That was my earliest memories are watching Staubach and Tony Dorsett and Drew Pearson, those guys. That was my formative years. And then of course, I don't know sports. Again, let's go back to this sports and artist thing. To me, a great professional athlete is like an artist. Just to watch the way they move and think in real time. And we were before we started rolling here, we were talking about the Stanley Cup Finals, and
Yeah.
and of course that this will air a couple of weeks after that. What do we want to say? The Spurs choked, or the Knicks had one of the greatest comeback in finals history.
I think
We're
that's
not
what
quite
we'll
sure how
always
that's going to
remember.
end up in 7 games, but but there's a poetry to it. There's a fluidity that you don't know what's going to happen next. I always feel like sports is the greatest reality show out there, and I don't quite understand when people don't enjoy watching sports. It's just been it's such a second nature to me. Even my wife, I'm so blessed to have a wife that Jackie will almost every night of the week going, is there a game on tonight? Is there
Wow.
once football comes on, we won't watch anything else. We'll watch every single game that's on every single night. But to me, it's the unknown. And same thing with being an artist is you have your plays, you have your songs, you have the set list that you're going to do, or you have the idea of what you want to do. But in the moment, anything can happen.
Yeah, and I think also because I've always been fascinated with the performance, the art of what you do. I think in being blessed like I was to be along with a lot of future Hall of Fame athletes, and many musicians like yourself. I think the one common denominator here is you're not taking any shortcuts, right? You have a God-given ability that you're given, but you're just not going to do it without practice and handling business the right way. Even in all your touring years, just like I had to call games in the NBA or whatever, we all learned the art of taking care of the voice and all those little tricks of the trade that we had to do. So I think that's what's fascinating by any of the performance industries, as we just had to, there is a switch there. There was a time when you were on stage, but you also had to get very good at your craft.
That's true. That's true. So, I mean, obviously, you were getting really good at your craft, being on local television, and then eventually making it onto the national stage with ESPN. How did that happen for you?
Well, I mean, early on they started giving us less time, Andy, on TV for sports. Weather and news got more time in local news, and so I guess I was either smart enough early on to decide. I think the sports talk industry, where we got to do it 24/7, was the way to go, and so that was my inroad to getting hired by ESPN at a couple of large stations that they operated themselves. They always wanted to have that radio part, so it was just something of ESPN was always being talked about. So, and that was the heyday of sports talk radio in the late '90s when I got into it. So, it was just really a good thing to be involved in that, and I think we kind of helped fuel the growth of many sports, was just by talking about it all the time.
Yeah. So what was your first show?
I ran the sports talk station in Lexington, Kentucky for a short period of time after I left television there, and then I went to be the morning drive sports talk show host in Portland. When I met you for 3 years there, those were the Blazer teams that I covered that ended up going to the Western Conference Finals with Pippen and Steve Smith and Rasheed Wallace and
never could get past the Lakers.
No,
that whole era, man.
No, lost that Game 7 in one of the great Western Conference Finals in 2000.
Yeah, I remember.
So I remember that one, almost every play of it. But yeah, so 3 years there, and then to Dallas with ESPN from then on.
And man, what was it like just touring around with the Cowboys? Because I mean, that was, when the thing I learned from you and from other people that I know that are covering these teams on a daily basis. I mean, you're in the middle of all of it. And I'm sure you can only report on a small fraction of what you experience and maybe even what's allowable in your industry. What was that like?
Well, I think, it was a tremendous opportunity because one thing is, and this is what I'll always salute Jerry Jones as one of the most visible owners of all of sports, is he doesn't win all the time, but he understands marketing, right? And so what he would do is he would take a group of reporters like myself. I was the Cowboys insider for ESPN Dallas, and he'd take us along. We'd ride on the team plane, and basically you were there every day of training camp, no matter where they were, every day of practice. And so, the access was unbelievable. And, he knew that people would be reporting all stories, whether it's wins or losses. But to Jerry, just having a team being talked about was basically how they became and stayed America's team in terms of being a polarizing team. Half the country hates them, half loves them, and so that's what polarizing is. So it was just unbelievable access. I was lucky because those were Emmett's last couple of years when I first got there, and so I got to see the record of the rushing record, and didn't win a whole lot of games, but Bill Parcells was a very interesting guy, and there was never a dull moment when you're with the Cowboys.
Was there ever a time where they were just like, Dave, we need you to leave right now, like stop asking those questions?
No, I mean, those were T.O.'s years. So there was a lot of strange times.
Wow,
the thing I always did the most, Andy, and I tell young people is, don't just let those access points be your only time that you get to know people. So, a lot of times I just go to practice, go in the locker room, and I talk to the backup center, backup left guard, kicker, punter, and just probably my biggest secret to getting good stories was just talking to all kinds of people. And even some of the legends in the business, the late John Clayton from ESPN. One of the things that John did very well is he would call me like 3 times a week and ask me what I'm seeing, what I'm hearing. And then you'd hear him using, I'm hearing this in Dallas or whatever when he would do it nationally on ESPN. But he was just so good at building relationships with friends and people that we didn't feel bad giving that information to somebody else because we knew it was being represented well. So I think players and teams were the same way. That's where sometimes you get sources because you've treated them right and you're going to be fair. And that's what I always tried to do.
Was it how much of those guys living out their faith did you see? Was it pretty out in the open during that era?
It you know what it was. I would still call it a minority, but I was a minority based group. But it was interesting because I sat a couple of times on both the Mavericks and the Cowboys plane next to Tony Evans. Tony would go along and lead the chapel service, before the game. But I think maybe it was not as open in terms of because social media wasn't as big or whatever. So, there were certain times when I would see a larger group of faith-based athletes, talking and meeting together, especially, in the NBA where both teams would meet in a room, well before shoot around or whatever. And so it was nice to see, but I think that, sometimes now maybe you hear and see it more.
Well, you definitely do, and it's one of the reasons I asked because, I mean, it just seems like there is it is because of the rise of social media over the last decade, but there does seem like a revival happening, not only in sports, but in politics and in even in Hollywood. There are people starting to stand up for their faith. It feels like a different time. I wondered if there was, how much you saw of that back in those days of touring with professional teams.
Yeah, I didn't see it as much, and I think I've seen it more now in the last 10 years, and then maybe more vocal by some of the athletes who will then go out and do something. But a lot of times I would see, there was huge growth of Fellowship of Christian Athletes in many cities, and I would see a lot of gatherings or events involving that. So I think, like you said, a lot of it changed due to certain times, whether it be the rise of social media or now just having such a line in the sand in so many ways. And that's some of what I don't miss, is just sometimes the constant focus away from sports and trying to get athletes' opinion on all things in life. It goes back to the great, Charles Barkley saying that he wasn't a role model, which I disagreed with. But then again, I can't imagine if he would have, been in this, same era today playing.
Wow. Yeah. I was going to ask this, one of the things that we have to, I want to say one of the struggles, one of the things we have to deal with being a full-time artist is the traveling and being away from home a lot. And that's eventually, for me, what made me want to change professions. Like I've got teenage kids at home, or I've got kids who are about to be teenagers. Yep. I'm missing a ton of their lives. And I know for what you were doing, you were on the road a ton and gone away from home. How did you deal with that? Was that something that was a tension between you and your wife?
It was. I mean, there's no doubt. But I mean, she had it much harder than obviously me. But I think it was hard, as you well know, to know that you were gone that many times. We didn't raise any children, so that didn't affect it as much. But it did. I mean, there is always a price you're going to pay for being on the road and especially in that environment. In an environment where you're around people that have based their lives on what they own and what they can own, and irresponsibility in terms of what they have and their possessions. So it's it's a challenge, but everybody has it. I won't say it was even more so, but it was definitely evident.
I can't imagine these days. The life that I live now, and I don't know about you, but man, having to get back on a tour bus or jumping on a plane 4 or 5 times a week and traveling the country. First of all, I don't know my body could take it. But there's something about looking back going, that's a young man's, and a lot of times it's a young man's career, but that can take a toll on you. I mean, it really can. Just being in a different place every night and being away from home is it's not as glamorous, in my opinion. It's not as glamorous as everybody makes it out to be. I don't care who you're around.
No. And as you well know, I mean, it doesn't, first of all, it doesn't make you really love travel more, because it doesn't matter if you travel with good teams, yes, we stayed in nice places, but if you're not in your own bed or room, it doesn't matter. If you get there at 2:30 in the morning, in Salt Lake the night before a NBA game the next time, there's nothing luxurious about just hanging out and spending time. So it was always hard, as you can imagine, if you have friends in other cities and they're like, my goodness, you were here and you didn't call, and you know what it's like. I mean, sometimes you're barely on the ground for 8 to 10 hours, in one city before you move on to the next. So
I got to ask this. One of the things that amazes me about guys like you, Dave, is the knowledge you keep in your head, the statistical knowledge, the history of sports is just mind blowing. Was that something that you realized you had early, that you could just you could remember batting averages or free throw percentage, 3-point percentage, completion percentage, those kinds of things that the casual sports fan can, they think they know, but they really don't know. And I would just imagine somebody that does what you do,
yeah,
that you have a special place in your brain, or at least in your personality, that can house all of that. I'm not going to say it's useless information. It's useless information to 99.9% of us, but to you, it's like, this is something you got to have.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I think everybody kind of retains it in a different way. For me, I got a lot of it from, and I keep it right here in front of me on the desk. I've got old packs of, this is a 1990 Topps football, and every once in a while I'll just open them up. And so, you get these cards and you realize that on the back, this is what I read, back when I was growing up. So sometimes it was kind of taking in those kind of things that I would remember later on. Then when I did play-by-play for a number of teams, it was part of my memorization of trying to remember it. And then the funny thing is, though, you get into normal non-sports life, just everyday life, and you can't remember the same type of things. But then I'm around somebody else who remembers obscure stats. I've been around athletes and coaches that can literally, you name the game, and they'll remember certain moments of a basket or a run being scored or a touchdown, and then what happened after that. And so some people's memory is just crazy. But for me, it's a lot of time periods. It's a lot of teams. It's a lot of not so much individual games, but yeah, the stats and data have always interested me. And so when that grew so much at ESPN, we used to have a group of about 5 to 6 people in the ESPN stats and research department. Then it got to be about 60 people, and we would get an email every day, which was about 16 to 18 pages long, with all those did you knows that most fans would love to have. And I'd read them every day, and you just kind of tried to consume as much as you could. So it became almost like your everyday reading.
Do you have a favorite sporting event that you've been to live? Is there one that just kind of sticks out to you? You've been like, I cannot believe I'm here and get to be a part of this.
I think always, the ones, the classics like the Kentucky Derby or the Indianapolis 500. I think for me, it wasn't so much the job I was doing there. It was just the actual atmosphere itself. So like when we're recording here, I think for the NBA Finals or any trip in the NBA, it was always a classic to be playing in Madison Square Garden. So I'm sure it's kind of an event that made it extra special. But I think those ones that you just have on your bucket list to go to, Derby, Indy 500, Daytona 500, those are the ones that stood out the most to me.
There are a few on my bucket list that I should have called you in the past, because you've always had an open invitation to me. You said, hey, man, just call me anytime. If I'm around, we'll go see some fun stuff. And that's something I've never taken advantage of. But I will say, and I have to thank you for this again, I tell this story all the time, you set up an opportunity for me and my brother and my son and my dad, who we didn't know at the time was only going to live a couple more years.
Yeah.
You hooked us up to go to a Mavs game, and I don't even remember who we were playing that night.
Yeah, I don't remember either.
But you got us great seats, and then at halftime, you escorted us into the locker room. We got to go into the Mavs locker room.
Yeah,
which is just still, I still can't believe we got to go in there, and they even meet then General Manager Donnie Nelson.
Yep.
Took us into the practice facility.
Yeah.
Gave us some little take home, gifts. I think my son got a pair of Jerry Stackhouse's shoes that we just found in a closet like a couple of months ago. Go, what are we going to do with these? Like, have these size 18s, that I don't even know what to do with. But that was one of those things where it was like, my dad. There was one thing he got to see. He was a massive Baylor fan. He and my mom. He
Oh,
was a Baylor grad, and they lived in Waco, so they got to see. They loved the women's basketball, and that was back when
yeah,
Kim Mulkey was still
right.
the coach there. So they got to see the Baylor women win the national championship, and I'll just never forget the tears in his eyes. Just they went to every game, they went to every baseball game, they went to every football game, they went to every men's basketball game. But the one thing he didn't live to see was the Mavs winning the championship in 2011, and there are those special moments for he and I. Just being on the phone, I remember that first time the Mavs beat the Spurs in the playoffs after so many agonizing
Oh
years
my
of
goodness.
just getting never could get past the Spurs in the playoffs.
Yeah.
And that first time that they beat him in the playoffs, we were on the phone just
Yep.
laughing and crying and couldn't believe it. And had he been around in 2011 as I was weeping, he would have been weeping too. But there was something so special, and I saw it in his face and his eyes. And it was the first Mavs game he ever went to,
Oh wow.
believe it or not.
Yeah. No.
We had just never done it. And so that was one of those really special things that I think about you, Dave. When I think about my dad, that's one of the places that I go to just go, man, I'm so grateful that we got to have that time together.
Yeah,
at that in
that's
that
such a
venue.
blessing because I never took it for granted because that was such a great place for people to be with sporting events, and even though that was my daily work life for so many years, I tried to never forget that was a great access point. It was a great memory. It was a great family builder, relationship builder for a lot of people to be at a sports event. By the way, wait a minute. I've had this next to me because I needed it to refer to, but this is the hat from the 2006 Mavs finals that they lost
Ouch, that one hurts.
and kept me from being along the ride and thus getting a ring because, the Miami Heat came back almost down 3-0 in that series. They came back to win the rest of it. And so that's 20 years ago. It's hard to
Wow.
believe that it's the 20th anniversary. And then I had left the Mavs, and then they go on and win because that was the year
maybe there's a pattern here, Dave.
they eliminated the team that I was with. They eliminated the Lakers in the first round that
That's
year,
right.
and that was famously Phil's last game coaching ever. And so I'll never
Yeah.
forget, getting back to LA and seeing Phil come down right in front of me on the team plane with a cane. Phil would use a cane that you never saw on camera, but he was just at the end of the career. But what a career it was! But what a kind of changing of the guard. That was the end of the 3 straight titles by the Lakers. And when you get to the end of that, you're just spent. I could just see that those guys they'd gone through 3 straight years of playing well into June.
What was the difference in going from Dallas to LA? Because that'd be quite the switcheroo as far as, I don't know, mindsets, lifestyles. Of course, you go from a team that's never won a championship, it's been hard luck, for 30 years, to a team they're running out of space for banners
Yeah,
in the rafters.
yeah. Well, it was such an incredible market just because, when like for the Clippers, they're always going to play second fiddle. The Angels are always going to play second fiddle to the Dodgers or the Lakers in that city, and it's amazing that a city like New York does, where they just rally around a team so much. And then I think the Cowboys kind of got me ready for that Lakers experience, where you're America's team with the Cowboys, you're kind of America's team in a way with the Lakers, that polarizing thing. And so wherever you went, it was a big circus event. But it was interesting because the NBA fan base was different. There was more Kobe fans wherever we would go than there were Laker fans. They would have Laker jerseys on, but they were Kobe fans until, and so I never got to see it after that because my last year was Kobe's last year as well. So,
Wow.
so that was kind of an interesting dynamic with a franchise like that. And then, a lot of sports, they lost those rivalries. And so a few teams like San Antonio and Dallas, or like Boston and LA, they've managed to keep that. And I think that's what's good, and maybe what the Knicks have kind of revived this year as well.
Yeah, I think so too. It's been so fun to watch the playoffs this year, and I'm a playoff junkie. I just one of my pet peeves. My wife's just like, honey, you got to calm down. But it's when
Yeah.
my friends or people I see on TV who now they're all in on the playoffs, but they haven't watched a single regular season game. I'm like, no, you don't. You don't get to do that.
No.
I get a little self-righteous. Like, I've been watching every single game this year
Yeah.
to get ready for the playoffs. So I know the tendencies and I know the matchups. And
Yeah.
I know he doesn't need to be taking that shot at this point in the game. And, I don't know. That's just, I get a little self-righteous with sports. But
No, it's amazing, Andy, because I always said the dynamic thing about it is it's like a chess match, right? When you get to the playoffs, those coaches after game 1, game 2, or game 3, just what it does to the series is to those little tweaks that they make, that one little change or two, and then also to just see the old ABC Wide World of Sports, the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat. You really see it there. I think it was the year after the Miami loss. It was 2007. The Mavs were the number 1 seed.
you're going to break my heart again.
Yeah, right. And then they got beat by the 8 seed in Golden State in the first round the next year. That was the year that was 5. That was 2005, right? So that was
No, it was the year after they lost.
to the Heat. It
Yeah,
was
the year after
2007.
they lost the finals. Yeah.
So what ended up happening is that year we got beat 8 beating a 1. Never had happened. And that night, I was one of the last ones with Dirk to leave the post-game meal there at Golden State or in Oakland. And, Dirk, he asked the waiter for like the largest bowl of ice cream. And I'd never seen somebody so happy to eat a bowl of ice cream. And I go, wow, it's like you haven't ate it in a while. He goes, I stayed off of sugar the entire season. And he was going to end up winning the league MVP award the next week. And he was almost embarrassed of it because he was just so upset that he had let the team down. But it was an incredible story to see a world-class athlete realize that they had just gone the entire season, more than 80 games, and was so disciplined like that so that they could win, and then to see the moment where it just cuts off.
Wow.
And you just
yeah.
indulge in ice cream.
Well, it just shows you what it takes. People say, what does it take to, you wonder what it takes to get to that level. That's what it takes. It takes more discipline than, it's 1 in a million.
Yeah,
It really is.
Well, and you saw it, right? I mean, you couldn't be a great performer again by taking a shortcut. Every young kid that asked me the difference in Kobe and Dirk and Emmett, it was just when you traveled with them, you saw it. When we got to another city, those guys grabbed a car and went over and put some shots up, no matter what time of the night, and the other guys went up and played video games in their room. That was it. That was the deciding line right there.
Wow.
Was the winners were always trying to maintain that extra edge, no matter what time of the night or when or where. I like these takeaways. That's what I learned.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I had somebody come up to me one time after a concert, and this was probably back in the late '90s, and I guess I was probably in a bad mood, like I was ready to go home, or not feeling well. But I learned a long time ago from Wayne Watson. He's just like, if you're starting to wear down, and the smile starts to fade, just get up and walk away. You're just human. You only got so much to give every night and every trip out on the road. Don't blow up on somebody. And so I did have one of those moments where I had a guy come up to me while we were signing CDs and T-shirts and stuff, and he said, "Hey man, I just really felt like the Lord showed me during that concert, I'm going to be playing bass for you guys one day on the road." And I said, "Can I just ask you a couple questions?" And this is where it kind of went off the rails. I said, "How old are you?" And he goes, 35. I was like, "Okay. And you got a family?" "Yeah, I've got my wife of 15 years, and we've got 3 beautiful daughters." And I'm like, "What do you do for a living?" And he's like, I think it was like, "I own an accounting firm, and I work for an accounting firm," something like that. I said, "Okay." I said, "Can I just be real with you? The only way you're going to play bass on stage with us is if you get in a time machine, go all the way back, and just play bass every day for 6-7 hours a day. You're going to live on ketchup packets until somebody takes you on tour, and then you're going to tour, 150, 200 shows a year." I said, "I don't understand what you're saying here. You're going to leave your life of your family and your job that you have worked so hard to achieve just to see something that is really cool up there. And I remember I found him a couple minutes later after I just crushed his world, and I went back to apologize, and I said, "Hey, I'm sorry. I'm sure I'm tired.
Dashing those dreams.
But I'm like, can we just be real for a second?" I think
Yeah.
I was like, can I just be real with you and just go, this is a different level than just, playing in your, playing in your basement after the kids go to bed.
Yeah.
It's just, it doesn't work that way. So I do, this one thing I do really appreciate about professional athletes and guys like you, Dave, who have had such a great career behind a microphone, because that's something I've always been like, if I didn't do this, I would love to be a sportscaster. I'd love to be a play-by-play guy. I would love to be a color guy.
Yeah.
There's just, the old adage, if I say it here, it comes out there. It's just like, that always looked like such a fun job to me. But it's also one of those things that you just can't jump into and do.
No.
It's something you have to prepare for your whole life.
No. And the same with you. Like, growing up, my parents, they wanted me to play the organ, the church, organ. And so, we had one of those, started with a Hammond, and then I had a much larger one with all the fancy things it could do. But I spent all my years doing that. But just like you said, with the gift of maybe remembering stats or data, I had to read music, right? So I wasn't playing by ear. And so thus I've always been fascinated with all of you from that point on, because I loved music, but if you didn't have the ability, if you were stuck on just reading it, I felt like that was, and then I got to Anderson, where there were so many great, there was a little on-campus group known as Chapman Henderson, a couple years before me. That was Stephen Curtis and his friend, so they just had Chapman Henderson there on the Anderson University campus. So those were just people that were gifted like yourself. So I've always said that if I could have learned to just play by ear, that would have been tremendous.
Well, we always talk about if you're going to go to Nashville and try to become try to make a living in Nashville, we always say, if you think you're good, just go to Nashville and they'll tell you how good you really are. You'll find out pretty quick.
Yeah,
it just is. It's a different level. And I want to get back to your story, because I think the world of you and what you've been able to experience, how you've held your faith through everything and stayed grounded. So you left ESPN.
Yeah.
Was kind of the Lakers stint? Was that kind of your last hurrah with ESPN?
I went to run the Detroit Pistons flagship for a short period of time, sports radio station in Detroit, and then they flipped formats. They decided to make it an urban radio station, so all employees doing sports were out, including the boss, right? So then
let's just say that happens. When that happens, it's like you're programming for tomorrow's show, and they walk in and go, "Hey, we just flipped a switch."
Yeah. And so that was the first time that had ever happened. So it was a career changer, and back to North Carolina we went, and I ran an ALS nonprofit organization, statewide organization in North Carolina for like 6 years, and now I'm back to just doing sports content and consulting and working with young broadcast talent now. But that was quite an experience to be able to run a nonprofit, but to do one that I had a passion in, because I had lost my mom in the early part of my TV career at ALS. So just to kind of see that side, know that sports can be a very, like Make-A-Wish and all the great sports dreams that are put together for people living with horrible diseases. It was really nice to be able to work around that, but it was very tough to work around a disease that has no cure. And I got a chance to see that there's just never enough funds in what we're trying to do to find the end of Parkinson's and Alzheimer's and ALS and dementia and everything. There's just never going to be enough funding just to make sure that they make progress. Sorry, I kind of went off the...
No, please. I think that's so important. I've always admired that about you, to start a nonprofit like that to help those that are suffering, and anyone that knows anyone that has suffered with ALS or has a family member that's had to care for someone with ALS. It's one of the worst things to have to deal with.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine what that would be like.
Yeah. But it was a lesson learned, and it was a great thing to learn to see after some of the years where you were around every potential sports type of success or whatever. You just realize that there's just really a lot more tough things going on. And once again, that's where we were in sports. That's what we were in TV and sports talk radio. We were an entertainment option for many people to take them away from everyday life. And I guess that's why fan following is just where it is right now. It's just off the charts, right? Yeah. I mean, it's been fun to see, especially during my 13, 14 years with ESPN, just see the amount of fan growth through fantasy sports and just cable and social media. And my goodness, I can't imagine social media around the days when I first started traveling with some of these teams and if some of these guys would have been on Instagram or Twitter or anything. So,
well, yeah, I think about that too. Just in our touring days, just going back to, I don't know, we talk about our truth days. When it was 350 days on the road, doing 350 shows a year, and all of the drama on the bus and all of the relationships. I think social media would have destroyed what truth, had become over 30 years. It would not have survived social media and all the stuff. Because let's just say it like it is. Most people, that's their way of making their voice heard without ramification. And it doesn't. You can't replace face-to-face relationships and having one-on-one personal relationships.
No, and that was the advent of reality shows, and documentaries and everything like that. Very few. You mentioned my Portland days. That was the days when I was covering those Blazers. That was the days when the famous Bulls documentary that we saw during COVID years.
Yeah.
I can't even remember the name of it, but that multi-series one that Michael Jordan had commissioned to have done.
Yeah, I've watched it twice.
Yeah, they were shooting it back then, and we didn't even know it because these cameras were, all over the place at these games, and all of a sudden, years later, I pop up in that
The Last Dance.
Last Dance. I pop up in that documentary because I'm taking a young Klay Thompson with his dad Michael back to meet Michael Jordan and get his autograph, and so then that pops up in The Last Dance.
Oh no! Which
Back
episode?
then we didn't even know. There was a camera there, but we didn't know that camera was actually.
I need to go back
recorded.
and look for that. I missed it. What episode was that?
I forgot which one
remember?
it is. It's like episode 4 or something. But you see,
Okay.
there I am with the
I'm gonna
microphone
go back and find that.
and standing next to a very young Klay Thompson
Wow.
as he's getting
Man.
an autograph. That's when I feel
Crazy.
old, Andy.
Yeah, don't we all?
But yeah, that's the advent of just back in the day. There wasn't those cameras everywhere. Even back in the late '80s when I first started covering the NBA while I was in college, we used to sit around and talk to Charles Barkley when he played, and he would talk about politics for like 20 minutes. And maybe somebody would write about it in the newspaper or whatever, but if there was social media back then, he probably would have been the most written about person because he always sounded like he wanted to be an office holder in politics, even back in the 80s.
Tell me where life has taken you on this journey.
Well, I mean, content. I love sports content. I love, I do my own podcast, The Game Plan with Dave Shore, and
Which is awesome. Love
and
it.
I just try to and you're a future guest coming up here soon. I like to talk to people because everybody's got not only their story but the lessons learned from winners along the way. So I've enjoyed that. I enjoy helping some of the young broadcasters out there who they don't just want to be in front of the camera; they want to be behind the camera now. And so I've been trying to kind of work on some content projects and some things that'll help the next generation of broadcasters. Hopefully, we'll continue to learn the responsibility that we once held as almost like something that was very, very important to us, was to never lose your credibility. And that's just, I'm glad I'm not in daily television now because it's just so hard. And I don't know if we'll ever get that back. I don't know if we'll ever get back an unbiased media the way that I was taught to be when I, was first in television. So,
Well, the Bible tells us that a good name is to be desired more than great riches.
amen to that.
And we see that traded off so much now because it's all about I want to get as many followers and make a big splash now, make as much money as I can, no matter what it does to my reputation and my name. And that's one thing I'll just say it again, Dave. I've respected you and just loved seeing your the way you live your life and how you treat other people. And the name Dave Shore to me makes me smile because you're my friend. And I love who you are and what you've done with your life.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the mutual respect for you and the fact that you've, stayed true to your beliefs and to sharing it with others and doing it in many different ways, in front of audiences, which isn't easy. We came from a business where we were taught and paid to give our opinion, but, in this day and age, everybody should go back to the Word, right, and back
That's
to
right.
the Bible, because we're just inundated with opinions, and sometimes that causes more chaos and confusion than anything else. So fortunately, we can all go back to the Word, and that's not always the case in other things in life.
Well, Dave, thanks, buddy.
Hey,
It's
it's
been
been
great
great.
catching up with you. We'll get on more calls after this. We don't have to let the whole world hear our conversations, but I love seeing your face. I love hearing your stories, and you're just one of my favorite people, bro.
Same to you, and let's make sure we stay in touch and stay blessed. Okay.
I could talk to that brother all day long. I love Dave. And of course, once we stopped recording, we talked about our theories on why the Mavs lost the 2006 finals and, some stuff like that maybe we'll throw in for another podcast sometime. Hey, thanks for joining today for a special edition of 1 Degree of Andy. I'll be back next week with another fantastic guest. Until then, make sure to subscribe so that you never miss an episode. And head to my website this week, andychrisman.com, to see all the things I'm doing beyond the podcast. I'll see you next week on 1 Degree of Andy.
Access more